Hi, welcome. My name is Dr. April Willis, and I am here on behalf of Proximity Learning, Inc. today. I'm so excited to be spending part of my afternoon with you, and I'm also thrilled to have a fantastic guest on our show today. We've got Travis Marks, also from Proximity Learning. We're going to introduce him here in a moment, but before we jump right into our webinar, we'd love to remind you about just a few key logistical points. First of all, please note that there are two different boxes you can be typing into. There is a chat box and there is a Q&A box. Use that chat box to build relationships amongst yourselves. You can comment on what you're hearing us say. You can chime in with where you're from, whatever it is that just feels like it's more social commentary. Please use the chat box for that. However, we also have a Q&A box. You'll see it right next to the chat box icon. I encourage you to use the Q&A box to drop your questions that you would like for us to answer. With the two of us on here, we can't really moderate the chat box as well as we probably should, but I can go through the Q&A and I can see exactly what open questions exist. And so we're going to go through those open questions either as they come up or definitely at the very end if we find that they might be a little bit relevant closer to the end of the presentation. So I do want to say hello to our friend from South Africa. Hi, Brandon. We're so excited that you're here. I do see that in the chat, and that's pretty incredible. I'm coming in from Austin, Texas, and we have a beautiful day here, y'all. I'm looking outside and it is bright and sunny and the weather is cool, and I can't wait to go play outside later. But before I do that, I am even more excited to go through this webinar with you. Today, we're going to be talking about flexible remediation in the second semester, and we're addressing some of those attendance and performance issues that you might have beyond your traditional classroom walls. And so in order to tackle this big subject today, I do have on here friend and colleague Travis Marks. Hi, Travis. How are you?
Hey, April. Thanks so much for having me. I'm
Yeah,
great.
I'm so glad you're here. And so the way this is going to basically work is we've got a series of questions here for Travis. He's going to chime in, provide his perspective, and then I'm going to have some things to add, I'm sure, every now and then. And then we're going to go through this webinar, mostly, as I had previously mentioned, as a thought leadership webinar. So we're just here to have thoughtful conversation with you, sharing those best practices, strategies, tips, and tricks. It's definitely not a sales pitch. We're not here to sell you anything, but hopefully you can glean some useful information and hopefully immediately apply it to whatever situation you are in with your campus or your district. So before we jump in, I would love Travis, though, to provide a brief introduction. Let us know who you are, what you're about, and why we might look to you as being an authority in this subject.
All right. Well, my name is Travis Marks. I am the lead teacher trainer at Proximity Learning Inc. So I get the incredible privilege of welcoming new teachers to Proximity Learning, and I get to spend a lot of time working with them, preparing them to start their teaching experience. And a lot of them are sometimes new to virtual instruction. So getting to take lifelong educators who have very rich experiences and showing them how to transfer that into a more virtual space. It's an incredible pleasure. So I suppose that makes me an authority, but I'll defer to you.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. And it's so important that we make this distinction early on that you can be a very seasoned, reputable teacher in brick and mortar, but to be able to transfer your approaches that worked really well in a physical classroom, it's going to take a little bit of modification and adjustment on your behalf to also be successful in a virtual world, right?
That's a really good point. Yeah. And it's so amazing once these seasoned teachers in the brick and mortar space do start to learn these digital tools, what they are able to do and push the potential of virtual learning. I'm humbled every day in my role. I am technically the trainer, but I learn more than I could possibly teach.
I love that. That's so great to hear. Well, I'm excited to hear what you're doing as a teacher trainer. So first question, what have we learned about the need for flexible forms of access and remediation in the P12 environment? What does that look like for you and the teachers you're working with?
That is a great question. Well, this is something I'm really passionate about. Flexible forms of access and remediation are so important in the second semester to empower students to continue learning despite disruptions that might be occurring. And of course, we know that these have been uncertain times in the education space with things like COVID-19. So these are just generally good practices to have. Implementing these kinds of practices to foster flexible access and remediation do allow for just students to stay on track and to finish the year strong. It's a really critical time for students in the second semester because they need to solidify their understandings of key concepts that we've been going over and also prepare for end of year assessments. So I really think it's time to double down at this time of the school year. Uh, we do this by implementing a number of strategies to really promote resilience and engagement in our students. Regardless of the educational setting, these are great for traditional classroom settings and remote learning environments. The first thing that we try to do is leverage technology to boost engagement and bolster our synchronous instruction. So we can do this with learning management systems, digital tools, and even AI-based tools that facilitate things like document sharing, tracking of student progress, and providing more personalized instruction. So important in that second semester slump. I don't like to think the slump occurs, but we all know it
Yeah.
sometimes does. Uh,
I love what you're saying there about leveraging technology, because for people who are making a transition from brick and mortar to virtual, oftentimes what we hear is this apprehension to being able to fully dive into the technology that we for so long have been telling our students to put away. In the physical classroom, it's put your phones away or I'm going to take it. Put your phones away or parents are going to have to pick it up after school from the principal's office. I've seen schools that provide, there are fees you have to pay to get your phone out of jail. Like all of the things that we previously have been telling students you don't get to access, you can't find your resources online. It's in a textbook, it's on paper, and we talk to each other. We don't text, we don't email, we don't, like all of the things that have typically been prohibited because there's almost this fear of competition with technology in the classroom. Like we know that students are using the exact same devices to access their video games as they would to log into your virtual classroom. So like, what are you doing to be the teacher that the student chooses to go into that classroom as opposed to choosing to play a video game? And so being able as a virtual educator to lean into that and to be like, hey, we're no longer telling you you don't get to have access to technology. We're showing you how to maximize your use of technology. And so I really like having that shift in your mindset and recognizing that that needs to occur. And then giving people almost this, like, you're almost empowering them to be like, it is okay to think like that. Not only is it okay, but it's required in a virtual setting. Like, so yes, you do have to shift the way you were thinking about what education looks like in a virtual world. And you have to shift how you think technology fits into that educational world. So have you seen any of this apprehension play out with teachers?
Oh, of course. And we try to ease people into things. You know, I always like to say it's really not rocket science. One thing that I like to do is take newer teachers into classrooms that are in session, virtual classrooms, so they can watch the process unfold. Uh, it is not as technical and daunting as it seems, you know, one activity at a time, one platform at a time. But these are just tools to make sure that students have universal accessibility to class resources and that they can engage anytime, anywhere. Uh, and it's to our benefit. That's all
For
that we're
sure.
trying to do.
Yeah, and I also like that point that you just made around one thing at a time, because what we also see, especially with our really seasoned teachers, the ones that hadn't necessarily grown up with technology, there is definitely a hurdle that has to be crossed with, oh my goodness, I'm drinking from a water hose. Y'all are sharing like 95 different resources with me. I'm supposed to remember passwords and usernames for all of these. And like, it does start to feel like a lot. And one of the things that I like to tell teachers is that it's not about learning every single platform that exists, but it's feeling really competent or proficient in a handful of them that do different things so you can rotate them out. It's kind of like building out that toolkit of resources. You don't have to have every single tool in the toolkit, but you really should know how to use about 4 or 5 of those tools really, really well, right?
Oh yeah, and this is really true for everything. I don't know if you know this about me, but I used to be a wrestler, and some of the best wrestlers they learn 3 or 4 moves and they learn them great, and they take that all the way to the championship. So that's true with whatever you're doing. Get a few tools in your toolbox and really refine them.
For sure. Well, I just learned something new about you. That's pretty fun. Well, what takeaways have you observed regarding the preparation of flexible forms of access to class materials and remediation? And tell us what that even means. What does it mean, flexible forms of access? What are we talking about?
Yeah. Well, when I'm thinking of flexible forms of access, I mean, hey, you can access this content synchronously with us, but even if you are out of class that day, we're using like a learning management system where we can post recordings of our lectures, or we can post access to collaborative applications, online workspaces where students can collaborate together, shareable documents. This is what we mean when we say flexible forms of access, and also remediation, because when you allow for students to get self-paced practice remotely, it's a huge benefit to them.
Oh, for sure. Anybody who has watched these webinars by PLI before, you have heard me say so many times the great value that comes with being able to record our classes and put them onto an LMS or learning management system. We try not to use the lingo too much if you're
Good
still
point.
learning it in the virtual world. When you can put those recorded lessons on there, can you imagine the difference you are making in student learning? Because back in the day when we were in school, y'all, if we had a dentist appointment at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, we lost whatever learning happened in that seventh grade biology class. You just didn't get it. You could try to get notes from a friend you trust, but that's not the same experience as hearing it directly from the expert, the teacher at the front of the room giving you a lecture. Or if you missed your quiz, a test, a group assignment, whatever it is, you missed it. And you oftentimes had to come back after school and try to make up something. You had to have homework that felt more like busy work just so that you could get the same credit everybody else got for sitting in class that day. This is actually, it is reimagining what the classroom looks like. It is allowing students to access that lecture that they typically would have not had access to. Or what's more, what about the students? Because we know there's a huge group of students out there that are not processing things the first time it is delivered. Now they have the opportunity to re-listen to that lecture, pause it, rewind it, listen to it again, and you can absorb this learning in a way that you previously did not have the privilege of being able to absorb learning. And so we are not just doing this because COVID forced us into it. We are doing it because it is actually benefiting our students in ways that we previously were not accessing or providing our students, right?
Yeah, I could not agree more. It's not that we're trying to make everything asynchronous, but we want to make all of our materials available asynchronously so that students can get the most out of that synchronous learning experience. That's really the point
Sure.
of this flexible access.
Oh, absolutely. And it also reminds me of when you are able to put your assignments, your homework, your readings online. Guess what, y'all? We have now lost the excuse of my dog ate my homework. I left my book in my locker. I left my homework on the coffee table. My mom drove off with my assignment. Like, no more of that. Everything is accessible on any device, anywhere. When everything lives on the cloud, we are removing barriers to learning for students. It is no more that where they are dependent on hard copy physical objects that exist in different environments. Now everything's in one place and we are making it more accessible to them, especially important for our students who might live in multiple homes and they might forget something in one home and then they have to go spend a few days with a different parent or they're in foster care. There are lots of reasons why our students are not necessarily being set up for success because of variables outside of their control. And this is one more element that we have power over as educators in which we can create an environment of success for our students. And so I think that having these flexible forms of access are incredibly important. When we are at Proximity, we are on a mission of equity for 1 million children. And I think that this is one more way that we're able to do that.
Oh, that's such a good point, April.
Perfect. Well, can you describe some of the ways that districts can use flexible forms of remediation during uncertain times? I know we talked about access to resources, but specifically remediation, what does that look like?
Oh, that's a really great point. Well, first of all, it's very important to use formative assessments to make targeted remediation. So when you are using formative assessments in the online space, they can self-evaluate. They provide very easy to read and understand reports about student learning and achievement, which allows us to really target our forms of remediation. Second of all, it's just so important to make assignments and content accessible to students online so that they can work on their own pace. That's a big part of remediation, is allowing students to work through it in the way that they're able to. And then finally, I think it's really important to also implement things like uh, digital tools, for example, that can tailor the student learning experience. So when you are implementing technologies like MobyMax or iReady or Quizlet that take that data and personalize the practice questions that we're asking students, that is how we can best engage them and remediate at the same time. Oftentimes, we actually refer to this as learning acceleration rather than remediation. We're not necessarily trying to go back and reteach everything, but we're trying to make sure that we're adjusting our teaching approach to meet the needs of students where they are.
Perfect. I love that. And for any of the people who are listening right now, because I know we've got people on here from central office, we have some HR personnel, we have some superintendents, we do have some teachers on here as well. But people who are not in the classroom might not be familiar with the term formative assessment. So we'll just dive a little bit into what that looks like and what that means. Essentially, a summative assessment means at the very end of a unit, you are doing a check to make sure that they understood everything that was covered comprehensively. It could be the end of a unit, it could be the end of a year, it could be those state mandated exams. Those would all be considered summative assessments. Our formative assessments are those checkpoints within. So traditionally, it would be like a pop quiz is a formative assessment. You want to see, do you understand something before we actually go into that unit test? But in a virtual environment, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, we've got a ton of ways where we can evaluate students and their understanding along the way. Right now, we could do one. Be like, if you understand what we're talking about, give me a 1. If you think you understand it, give me a 2. If you feel like, man, I am at a complete loss, I don't know what we're talking about, give me a 3. And so we could ask everybody in the class to hold up a finger, and the teacher automatically scans that classroom, and he or she knows exactly where the students are, which ones he or she might want to focus in on, which ones have it down pat. And in fact, I could use them as peer tutors. Now I'm going to create small breakout rooms, and I'm going to put the students who get it with the students who might not, and we're going to start to give them some work that they can do together, because we also know that students learn best when they're able to teach their peers. So we have opportunities for formative assessments along the way. That's just one. You could also use the chat, y'all. So we could ask a question. Again, it could be multiple choice. It could be, give me an example of. It could be, evaluate these 2 items. Tell me which one comes out on top for whatever reason. So you're still able to use varying levels of Bloom's taxonomy, because we know we want some assessment, we want some evaluation, we want some synthesis. Come up with any of those Bloom's taxonomy words you're looking for, and provide students an opportunity to give you a quick check-in with that in the chat. Those are just a couple of ways you can simply use a Zoom room for formative assessment. But when we were hearing what Travis was talking about, you've got things like Quizlet, Kahoot. You've got all these different tools and technology platforms that exist. You can put that in, because students are going to love the variety. It's going to be another opportunity for them to engage in something that feels more like a video game, and you get to infuse it into your virtual classroom. Now, of course, a lot of these are ones that do require live instruction, but there are going to be plenty of opportunities for you to come up with formative assessments in an asynchronous model as well. But thanks for sharing some of those with us. And as a reminder, if you have questions about anything we're talking about, I encourage you to drop them in the Q&A. We're happy to answer those questions for you. And again, that chat box is really more for just social commentary. Next question, what is something you wish someone would have prepared you for when you first started to offer flexible remediation options?
This is a really good question. I think one of the things I really wish that I had in my head when I started designing these forms of classes was to design with empathy for the user experience. That's so important. I really encourage my teachers that I train now to really just wonder, how are students going to interact with this material? How will they access it? How will they engage with it? How are they going to receive their feedback and implement that feedback to get better results? Uh, I can share some funny anecdotes about this. I first started designing more flexible access in my classes back in 2017. I was teaching at a sport academy where students would be gone for weeks and even months with tournaments. So we had to do blended learning, and I was pretty new to this and trying things out, and I was sharing remote access documents and shareable documents, but not giving the correct shareable links. So I was giving 30 kids access to one document, which of course you could imagine the document was never the same. So you learn those kinds of things. Make yourself a student and share your document with yourself. How are you viewing it? How are you accessing it? I have another interesting anecdote about this same experience that really does drive home this point. I was teaching in a university in Medellin, Colombia, when COVID hit. And this was a school that had no learning management system, no online form of access whatsoever. They tried to quickly implement like a learning management system, but we didn't all have organizational emails. It just was not working whatsoever. And in a scramble, we actually, and this is not a approach I recommend, but it does emphasize the point. We used Facebook, a private Facebook group where we could post assignments, house discussions, get students to post their videos and receive feedback. And students really soared in that learning environment. So we used I tried to be empathetic. What are they comfortable using, and how can we keep learning going in this uncertain time?
Wow, what a unique and creative approach. I'm so glad you shared that. And I love this idea of designing with empathy. And I would even say one of the things that I thought of while you were explaining that was it's hard to know what you don't know that you don't know. Like, how do you get proactive about addressing issues if you've never gone through any of the types of learning that you're trying to deliver for the very first time? And so similarly to what you were saying, it is going to take some trial and error, and it is going to take you as the teacher pretending to be the student so that you can figure out where are my gaps, because you've got these blind spots that you just don't know exist. The only way you can see them is if you put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Really great point. Thanks for sharing that. There's a couple of good stories in there. I feel like I'm learning a lot about you as a person today.
Am I oversharing?
No, this is wonderful. It's great. Thank you. When students exhibit a lack of motivation or even isolation, what intervention strategies might teachers implement in a virtual world?
Uh, this is a great question as well, because we're getting to the emotional element of our students. Our students are holistic human beings. They're not just the mathematician or the scientist or the, social scientist in our class. So it really is important to do these social emotional learning or social emotional check-ins. And I found that providing flexible access to social emotional check-ins are actually really just a benefit all around, because a lot of the times students might not feel comfortable being vulnerable in a synchronous classroom setting. But if we can provide asynchronously accessible social emotional check-ins that students know their teacher is going to read and really consider, then students tend to open up, and it really does encourage a more open and honest form of communication with students so that we can better address their needs. And then when we start to do that, we can also use, uh, we can also use uh, class recordings as a way to get students involved who maybe have missed class, or they're not able to focus in class. So again, remote access is so important there, so that they can, like you said, process it at their own pace if they're not able to really focus in that classroom environment.
Can you give an example of an asynchronous SEL check-in?
Yeah, absolutely. We really encourage the use of our learning management system for these. So I'll make a quote unquote quiz in Canvas, for example. Students don't see the word quiz. They just see a little rocket ship icon. They go in there and they can answer questions like, how are you doing today on a scale of 1 to 5? Can you unpack that a little bit? What are some things that you think your teacher needs to know about what's going on in your life? And students, when they are sharing through the learning management system, there's a record of what they're saying. I really caution against doing these kinds of things with like Google Forms, because if somebody posts anonymously and they do report something that is sensitive or should be reported, there might not be a record of who has said it. So it is important to make sure that you are documenting those kinds of check-ins.
Good point. That's a really great point. So many things can be tied to that, like making reports. If a report needs to be made to Child Protective Services, for example, if somebody is sharing something with you where their mental health is in jeopardy, and we need to make sure we have a mental health care provider called immediately, we want to know who we're sending it to and who we're talking about. So I do like that you do lose a little bit of perhaps vulnerability and honesty if they feel like it's not completely anonymous, but that we have to do so just for protective purposes. So I totally understand that. And I'd also just like to call back one more time, because I know we've got some people who are listening right now that aren't in the classroom. And when we say things like learning management system, and then I also heard you use Canvas, Are you saying Canvas is a learning management system?
Yes, Canvas is an example of a learning management system, and this is just an online space where you can post assignments and receive student submissions, manage a gradebook, those kinds of things in a virtual space.
Perfect. So I'm sure a lot of people have had experience with it, even if you're not in the classroom. Maybe you even have children of your own. It is the place where you get to log in and you can check their attendance, you can check their grades, you can check their homework, assignments, all of the things that you would typically expect to see somewhat in a virtual classroom. However, Zoom is not considered a learning management system. Zoom is considered a video management system, or VMS, and is also a way that we deliver the content. So we use Zoom as a way to communicate with our students, because you can record it, you can share those recordings, you can provide live instruction, but Zoom doesn't let you keep track of grades and attendance and all the things that you can get in a learning management system. So I hope that clarifies if anybody had any sense of confusion around some of the terms we're using. Next
Thank you for
question. Yeah, of course.
your questioning with empathy.
Perfect. Proximity Learning Inc. is also known as PLI. So when you see PLI on these slides, or you even hear us refer to PLI, it's the same thing as Proximity or Proximity Learning Inc. So how does PLI set itself apart as a quality educational option for families?
This is something that I obviously am quite passionate about as I'm in this world every day. I really think that proximity learning is a leader in innovation and flexible teaching practices. We are always designing our courses with remote access in mind, and we're trying to give synchronous students ample opportunities to review course content and receive additional practice outside of the classroom walls. So that is one of the ways that we really set ourselves apart, because we are synchronous, but we definitely provide lots of opportunities to bolster learning asynchronously. There's also just this incredible ethos of professional development at Proximity Learning. Is constant professional development that is offered. I think we might be the largest and most collaborative body of professional educators that have ever worked together in this capacity for this period of time, sharing resources, co-planning, designing by committee, to really deliver high quality instruction and super varied and differentiated forms of of instruction as well.
Wow, that's incredible. I had no idea. Thanks for sharing some of the experiences that you've had with the teachers in proximity. I'd also love, before we move on from this question, I noticed that we do have somebody who popped a question in the Q&A box, and so I'm going to throw that your way. We have Monica, who wants to know, what do you do when half of the students in the class are not connecting to Zoom, much less doing the work, and the TA is not getting support from school administration? So I know that this is something that a lot of schools across the country are facing, and it's one of the reasons why they might have the perception that virtual instruction isn't an option for them, because their students aren't logging in. So how do we address this first major hurdle so that we can reap the benefits that come with all of the things we've been talking about this hour?
Oh, that is such a great question. The first approach to this would be just communication, communication, communication. Communicate with school administration, communicate with parents and students, make sure that these expectations are very clear, and then report on when students are missing from class. Another facet of this that I have found in my experience teaching online is sometimes students aren't connecting to Zoom, not because they don't want to, but because there might be bandwidth issues and other forms of technical issues. So by providing multiple facets to receive class information, that does help mitigate that a little bit. If I can conduct my class via Nearpod, which is like an interactive presentation platform, or I can create collaborative spaces in applications like Padlet, or again, Nearpad has great collaboration access. Those are things that students can still get into and interact with their peers and receive lesson materials, even if they're not logging into Zoom. Of course, ideally, we want them on Zoom, camera on, focused in, but we want to use these forms of remote access to, again, allow for engagement, even when students are not present synchronously.
Such great response. I would love to add to it. And what I'm going to add is outside of the scope of many teachers, but this is going to be directed to our administrators. And I hope we can get support from the board if you guys need to make any policy changes. but it ultimately is going to come down to student accountability. When I hear about the districts who are like, everybody passes this year, everybody gets to move to the next grade level, attendance didn't matter, assignments didn't matter, we just have to keep students flowing through the system, we are doing such a huge disservice to our students. We need to hold them accountable because life is going to hold them accountable. They don't get to float through elementary, middle, and high school when they're not logging in, when they're not doing their homework, when they're not being held accountable for their actions. Part of education is not just teaching them the academic components, but it's also getting them prepared for life. And that includes responsibility, taking responsibility for your actions, being held accountable, because your job as a student is to show up to school and then to perform. And if they're not doing either of those things, they're kind of failing at their job. And if they were failing at their job, there'd be consequences. There should be consequences here as well. I know my stance was significantly harsher than what Travis had shared with you. But I do think it should be a balance of both. We do need to make sure, are they equipped to log on? So first, let's make sure they have everything they need. Do they have the devices? Do they have access to the internet? Are there bandwidth issues? Are there things that we need to problem solve to make sure students have access to education? And then once we are confident that they do, we must hold them accountable for accessing their education. So we have given them the tools, and now we need to hold them accountable for utilizing those tools. And I do think, again, what Travis mentioned though about communication, 100% valid, because although we are holding students accountable, ultimately we're holding parents accountable. Those parents are the ones who are at home with the students oftentimes and can make sure they're logging in and make sure they're doing their work. But there is an accountability lesson to be had here. And I know that in response to COVID, people were doing the best they can with what they had. We're past that, my friend. So that is no longer an option. I understand that it was an immediate response because there was funding tied to it. There was testing tied to it. There were so many things that were part of this domino effect of students not being able to be in class like they traditionally would be. But a few years have gone by. And so we've kind of learned, and hopefully we are turning this now into a well-oiled machine, and our students are going to continue to receive the high quality education that they deserve. And we're going to continue to hold them accountable for it.
I love that answer, April. Can I just say that
Good.
I think it's so important to balance firmness and flexibility. We're talking about flexibility in here, but that does not mean that we don't believe in accountability. I wasn't sure how principled of a stance I would take there, just because I know we're speaking to a wide audience, but personally, I am a firm believer in the motivating power of a zero. You know, I'll be flexible with deadlines. I'll allow for multiple attempts to submit, but a zero is a zero when there's zero submission and zero participation.
For sure. And I 100% agree with you that there is a level of grace that should be extended as well. We talked about earlier in this conversation, is there are students who are dealing with external variables outside of their control. They are a product of a system that they were put into. And we need to extend grace to those students so that they can be successful and they can feel like somebody's cheering them on and rooting for them when times are tough. We also need to show them some tough love sometimes if it is by choice that they're not performing. So I feel like we could talk about this for a while, right?
Right. And the tough love is just so true. You're not holding them accountable to be mean. You're doing it because you love them, because you want them to be successful.
Exactly. Well, thanks for the question, Monica. We appreciate it. If anybody else has any other questions and you'd like to see Travis and I get into a heavy heated debate right here, we'd be happy to do so for you. Our next question, though, is what professional development session or topic would you recommend other virtual administrators or educators explore? Has there been any PD that stands out to you?
Yeah, there's been a few specifically topics that I've really done PDs on that I really enjoyed and relate so much to this topic. The first is online course design more generally. There's a lot of massive open online courses that are, you know, oftentimes free and they're open and they're available online that show you how to design courses. They really emphasize things like designing with empathy and how to make your user experience more student friendly. There's some ones like Coursera, edX, Future Learn. They all have mass open online courses that are free to access on this topic. Additionally,
Oh,
oh
can I just chime in?
yeah,
You may have heard the terminology MOOC, and that is what Travis is talking about, MOOC. You can type that in your Google search, and that's where you're going to find access to all of these free courses that he's talking about. And they are provided by universities around the country, colleges around the country, nonprofit organizations, course platforms. You can find MOOCs anywhere. So that is the mass open online courses. And there is a lot of free ones available all around education, professional development, virtual learning, AI in the classroom. There's a lot of things you can explore. So thanks for throwing that out there. I'm going to give it back to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. Uh, Additionally, another thing that I was going to highlight was universal design for learning, or UDL. It's very commonly explored theme in education these days. And it's really about making instruction accessible to all students, regardless of their background or their learning needs. So again, really stressing that we're using our course design to be empathetic to different student needs. This can cover strategies for like creating flexible and inclusive learning environments, providing multiple means of expressing learning targets so that there's not just a one correct answer. And then also things like, different forms of representation so that we're getting students expressing themselves in the classroom as well.
Oh, that's so good. I really appreciate the recognition in when COVID first happened and schools were making this transition. The problem was with lack of resources when it came to hardware. They didn't have tablets, they didn't have laptops, they didn't have Chromebooks or computers at home, or there would be a family with 3 siblings sharing one cell phone, passing it around, or there would be communities where they didn't have internet. And so what happened, the school district would chip in, local community business partners, even corporations like Walmart, they would outfit school buses with Wi-Fi, drive them into low-income neighborhoods, and then allow everybody to access. So we were troubleshooting really quickly, making sure that every single student had access to the actual devices that they needed to access it. We put so much effort in that up front. We forgot how much the teachers needed resources in delivering in a new environment. They were not comfortable, and they were not made aware of the resources that existed for them to be able to provide this virtual instruction. And so now it is a time where I find that enough time has passed. There's now plenty of processes in place to make sure that students receive what it is that they need to be successful. Now it's time for us to continue focusing in on what do the teachers need to be successful. So when you have the conversation around what professional development you're accessing, what exists for them to tap into, we encourage you to do that, because I feel like we've solved much of the problem associated with access. Now it's about quality. How are we going to ensure that the students who are accessing our virtual instruction are receiving the same quality of instruction as they would in a brick and mortar? So thanks for sharing your perspective on that. One final question. When you encounter a challenge in education, where do you go to find solutions, Travis?
There's a few places that are kind of my go-tos. There are definitely like professional developments that are available online, and multiple training opportunities. There's the NVTA, for example, National Virtual Teacher Academy or Association, excuse me, that really does provide so much information about how to engage with remote education, and again, design your courses in a way that's accessible for all students. Another thing that I really enjoy is using my peer network. I've already said that, proximity learning really does have this incredible connected community of teachers. And I just feel it's an embarrassment of riches. On any given day within the organization, there are multiple office hours or professional development sessions that I can attend that fit within my schedule. And then finally, I also just really encourage just research, checking out different journals and publications. iJet is one that I really like, International Journal of Emerging Technologies and Learning. There's always really great articles in there. And then honestly, YouTube. If I'm
Yeah.
having an issue, go to YouTube.
For sure. I love that. It doesn't always have to be formal, y'all, because we are building this plane while we're flying it in the virtual education world. It feels like sometimes, right? Do we just feel like, you know what, the technology is changing faster than we can keep up with it? There's constantly a new platform. There's constantly a new tool, a new social media outlet I have to be aware of. Oh my goodness, talk about those usernames and passwords again. And so when you think of all the things that continuously come out in front of you and you're trying to stay on top of it, you don't have to wait for a peer-reviewed journal to tell you what to do next. You can go to the social networks that our students are learning from. We can learn from them too as adults. It's okay, because those are the people who are engaged in this stuff, and they can give you the tips and the tricks as insiders who have been actively using platforms that we can use to reach our students. So I love that you threw YouTube in there. Professional development led by peers, that is so important. And again, it doesn't have to be formal. It can be as informal as, I'm going to DM the best teacher I know and be like, hey, how do you solve this problem? And just talk to people one-on-one, building those relationships, not feeling like everything has to be like the stamp of approval from some educational formality institution. It really can be, I know that you're really good at your job and I kind of look up to you. I want to be as good at my job as you are as yours. So can you share with me what's working for you? When somebody put in the Q&A, what do you do when your students don't show up? Like, thank you, do more of that. Like,
Yep.
as opposed to feeling like, oh, I should have it all together. I should know the answers. We're all learning as we go on a lot of the topics that we are responsible for imposing our knowledge on others. And so it is so important that we tap into a variety of resources. And I'd also like to throw in that I believe by doing that, you are also making yourself a little bit, you're drawing your resources, you're drawing your information from a more robust, I guess, source. So as
Yeah.
opposed to constantly relying on one place of your information, I am now pulling from textbooks, journals, magazines, Facebook, YouTube, PD, my best friend. Like, you can pull from
Pinterest.
a lot of different things. Pinterest, right? It's so good. There are so many places out there for us to continue to grow as professionals. So I would encourage you to be open to that, and not feel like it has to always be formalized. I'm going to
Oh,
give you guys a final minute to type any questions you have in Q&A. And Travis, we're about to wrap this up. What else would you like to add?
can I just add one interesting place that I've been going to for answers lately? It's so interesting and new, and it's not always, the best, but AI chatbots are really fascinating. You can ask a question to an AI chatbot like, hey, do you have professional development resources on this topic? And they will instantly give you like 5 options. And then you can say, okay, summarize that book for me. They'll summarize it for you. Not because you want to take their word for it, but if you're having a hard time deciding what resource to choose,
Mhm.
that's a great way to narrow down your search.
Oh, that's such a great point. I love it. Can we just ask Alexa sometimes how she solves problems? We'll throw Alexa in there as a resource. It has been a pleasure spending my afternoon with you, Travis, and of course with the people who are joining us on the webinar today. This is all we had for you. I hope you found it to be immensely useful. Hopefully you've got some things you can take away, go back and immediately apply to your classrooms, your campuses, or your district. We are going to be also sending out this recording. So if there's anything you'd like to hear again, you too will have the opportunity to pause, rewind, listen again, just like we had previously talked about. Process this on your own time. That would be a version of asynchronous learning. What we're doing right now is synchronous. So we are all here at the same time talking about the same thing. You have the opportunity to engage with us in real time. And so this is what we get for synchronous learning. We've got another question. Can we get PD credit for this webinar? I think that's really going to depend on who you work for. And so you would want to reach out to whoever your supervisor is, let them know that you've attended a webinar that is related to instruction or education in the virtual world. And hopefully whoever your supervisor is at wherever you're working will be able to help you answer that question. But we do want to thank you so much for being here. Those are our emails on the screen, awillis@proxlearn.com and tmarks@proxlearn.com. Feel free to shoot us an email if you have any questions or you'd like further clarification on anything we chatted about today. And with that, I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day. See you next time. Bye.
See y'all.